So first, a disclaimer to our students. I'm sure that everybody here knows, but we had some technical problems at opening, but also yesterday. I want to reassure everybody that your attendance is being counted. Some people do show up as anonymous users on the Q&A. However, we do, as the organizers, have access to your names and your emails. So your attendance of yesterday was counted, and your attendance of today will be counted for your attendance certificate. So do not be worried about that. Plus, the Q&A is a part to make questions about the class, so please refrain from sending your emails, from sending your names. We do know you're here. We do have your emails. It's totally fine. So hope everything is going fine. We also have our manual pinned in the Q&A section, so if you have any more questions, please refer to it. So I'll start today's lecture. Welcome to the lecture on quantum threat to cryptography with Thomas Attema. I'll start by introducing today's lecturer. So Thomas Attema is a senior researcher in the Applied Cryptography and Quantum Applications Department of TNO and the Cryptology Group of CWE. In 2023, he obtained his PhD at Leiden University. He focuses on the development of new cryptographic techniques capable of withstanding quantum attacks and allowing data to be analyzed in a privacy-preserving manner. Today, Thomas will provide a lecture on the post-quantum cryptography migration. In this class, he will explore why quantum computers form a significant threat to many of the cryptographic primitives that are currently in use, and what alternatives exist to mitigate such threats. So now I hand it over to you, Thomas. You can start your lecture. We're all very excited to hear about it.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thanks everyone for joining this lecture today. So I will indeed be talking about the quantum threat to cryptography. And in a little bit more detail, I will first start with a short introduction to cryptography. Then I will move to explaining a little bit about what it takes to design a cryptographic primitive, so cryptographic protocol. Then I will tell something about quantum computing and its effect to cryptography. Then we will move to the topic of post-quantum cryptography, which is basically the field of cryptography that is able to withstand quantum attackers. And then what does it take to migrate towards this new type of cryptography? And I also have a few bonus slides on digital signatures and some exciting developments that are ongoing in that field right now. But let's see if there's time to also discuss that part of the presentation. So cryptography. So in cryptography, we often speak about Alice and Bob. Alice and Bob try to communicate with each other, for instance, over the internet or by sending a WhatsApp or a signal message. And they want to do this in such a way that an eavesdropper, Eve in this picture, is not able to intercept the communication or the messages sent from Alice to Bob or the other way around. So we try to encrypt the information so that Eve cannot read it. So cryptography, when speaking about cryptography, people always think about confidentiality. So indeed, we want the messages to remain private. But cryptography entails a bit more than that. It also handles integrity, authenticity, non-repudiation. So, for instance, if Bob receives a message, cryptography gives a means to prove that this message was actually sent by Alice. So to prove the authenticity of the sender, and also to prove that this message was not altered by someone in the middle, so by Eve. So Eve may not only be trying to learn private secret information, but may also try to alter the information sent from Alice to Bob. And cryptography is basically the field that deals with designing protocols to protect against this kind of malicious behavior. Well, probably all of you know that cryptography is all around us. So we're using a lot of digital communication channels nowadays, and all of those communication channels, almost all of them, are protected by cryptography. So, for instance, if you visit the website, you have a TLS connection to a website. So, if you have this green lock in your browser, it means that you are using cryptography under the hood. If you store personal private information, say medical records, then this information is protected with cryptography. If you use a credit card or you make another kind of payment via internet banking, for instance, the communication is protected by cryptography. And so you can think of many more applications of cryptography, but basically it's all around us. And if we go back and dive a little bit into the history of cryptography, then we see that cryptography is really, really old. So the first examples of cryptography can be considered like non-standard hieroglyphs. So this is a very early example of cryptography, but back in Egypt, like 2000 years before Christ, um, we found hieroglyphs that are non-standard, so they are modified a little bit. And the idea was to hide the message for people passing by. And this was not really a serious application of cryptography. It was more meant to be a puzzle for the people passing by these hieroglyphs. So now we know, or now the people know how to solve these hieroglyphs, these non-standard hieroglyphs. And so basically this form of cryptography has been broken or solved. A more serious example of the use of cryptography dates back to the Roman Empire. Julius Caesar used the so-called Caesar cipher to encrypt messages that he sent to his generals in the field. So he was actually using cryptography to protect the communication channels. Well, it took a long time, but like hundreds of years. But now we know that the Caesar cipher is, of course, broken. We know how to very efficiently break this cryptography that was developed so long ago. So here you already see that in cryptography, we have this arms race. On the one hand, we have the people designing cryptographic primitives. So Julius Caesar designing the Caesar cipher, or well, probably someone working for Julius Caesar. And on the other end, we have the people, the cryptanalysts, the code breakers trying to attack these schemes. So it's always this arms race going back and forward. Then later, we have, for instance, the Vignere cipher. Well, back then, people thought that this was a very, very strong cipher, much stronger than the Caesar cipher. So it was also named Le Chiffre Indéchiffrable, so the unbreakable cipher. Well, it took more than 300 years, but after 300 years, also this cipher was broken. So we can no longer use it. We know how to efficiently break this form of cryptography. Then a more recent example is the Enigma code, which was used by the Germans in the Second World War to encrypt their communication channels. You've probably seen movies about Alan Turing or read books about Alan Turing actually breaking the Enigma code and how it influenced the course of the Second World War. So indeed, this form of cryptography is also broken. Much more complicated again than the Vignere cipher. It used this early form of a computer or this mechanical device, but still it was broken, so we can no longer use it. Then we have the RSA crypto system, which was developed or designed in 1978. And we're still using it today to encrypt our communication channels, to protect our communication channels. So this is a scheme that we're still using. However, in 1994 already, so that's quite some time ago already, we already knew that this scheme, the RSA crypto system, was theoretically broken. So what does this mean actually? It means that in 1994, Peter Shor developed a quantum algorithm to break the RSA crypto system. So this means that if you have a quantum computer, then using this algorithm, you can break the RSA crypto system. However, now, back in 1994 and also now, we don't have such a machine, a quantum computer powerful enough to run this actual algorithm. So RSA is still being used and it's still considered secure. However, we're seeing a lot of developments in the field of quantum computing. Quantum computers are becoming more and more powerful, and we're moving closer and closer towards quantum computers being able to run this Shor's algorithm. So maybe in the near future, we don't know exactly when this will happen, but it may be already in 2030. It may also take some more time. Quantum computers will be powerful enough to run Shor's algorithm. And if that's the case, then the RSA crypto system and some other crypto systems as well will be completely broken. So we must start thinking about other crypto systems. So the point of this, well, historical note was basically that in cryptography, we always have this arms race between code makers and code breakers. And the arrival of the quantum computer is basically just a next chapter in this arms race. So now the code breakers will have a quantum computer at their disposal in the near future or in the future. And the code makers must try to design new cryptography that is able to withstand against attacks from these quantum computers. And if we then dive into the field of cryptography a little bit deeper, then we see that there are basically two different categories of cryptography. On the one hand, we have symmetric cryptography. And this is called symmetric because the same cryptographic key is used to encrypt and to decrypt information. So it's symmetric in that sense. And examples are the Caesar cipher, Vignere cipher, Enigma code. All of these historical schemes that we've seen in the past are symmetric cryptography. So this is a very powerful primitive or functionality. So we also have modern variants. So AES, for instance, is still secure and still being used today. So we also have modern variants of symmetric key cryptography. And this is very efficient. But the problem with symmetric key cryptography is that before you can use it, you must distribute this secret key between the two people that want to communicate. And this can be challenging. For instance, if I want to send a message to someone in Cape Town, then I can only encrypt it using symmetric key cryptography if we have previously met and exchanged the key. If I were to send this key over the internet, then that would already give us a terrible vulnerability. So to basically deal with that problem, the key distribution problem, we also have asymmetric cryptography, which is much newer, much younger. So the first asymmetric cryptography dates from the 1970s. So this is much more recent. RSA is an example, but also elliptic curve cryptography or Diffie-Hellman. And this kind of cryptography is called asymmetric because we have a different key, a public key that can be used for encrypting information. And we have a private key, so a different private key that can be used only for decrypting information. And the nice thing about this is that if I want to communicate with someone, I can just send my public key to this person. Everyone may know the public key. It does not provide any advantage to an attacker knowing the public key. And then this person can encrypt its messages to me using this public key. And I'm the only one that can decrypt because I'm the only one that receives or knows the private key. So we have this asymmetry and it sort of resolves this key distribution problem. So on the internet, of course, you can imagine that asymmetric cryptography or public key cryptography is essential. And the impact of quantum computers, we will soon see that it's mainly in this second category. So mainly asymmetric cryptography is impacted by quantum computers. For symmetric key cryptography, the effects are way less severe. So that was a short introduction to cryptography. Let's now move to designing cryptographic primitives. And in particular, we will focus on how to design public key cryptography. So what kind of properties are we looking for? We're looking for a protocol for which encryption should be easy. Everyone should be able to encrypt information. So this operation should be efficient. And also decryption should be easy if you know the private key. If you know the private key, then you are allowed to decrypt information. So you should be able to do this efficiently. However, decryption without the private key, so that's basically what an attacker tries to do, should be extremely hard. So we're trying to look for this asymmetry. Encryption should be easy, but decryption without a private key should be extremely hard. So abstractly, this is what we're sort of looking for. We're looking for so-called one-way functions, which are functions that are easy to evaluate. So going from A to B is easy, but very hard or extremely hard, even impossible to go from B to A. So you can think of the operation going from A to B as encryption and going from B to A as decryption. So we're looking for these kind of one-way functions. So a very simple example is factorization. So we all know how to multiply numbers. So multiplying two numbers is an easy operation. We know how to do this. So the first one, 7 times 13, you can do without pen and paper. You can do that by heart, basically. And if the numbers become bigger and bigger, the problem becomes a bit easier, but we still have an efficient procedure for performing this multiplication. So all of you will probably be able to do these multiplications without requiring a calculator or a computer. However, if we want to do the other, if we want to go the other way around, so if we want to factorize numbers, so if I ask you, this is the number 57, what are the two different factors of this number, then the problem becomes much harder. So 57 is still a relatively small number, so you will probably be able to solve the factorization problem and deduce that the factorization is 3 times 19. Well, if the numbers become a bit bigger, then the problem also becomes harder, much harder actually. So the second one probably also solvable, but it requires some time to do that. And then if we get even larger numbers, then the problem becomes infeasible to do without a calculator or without a computer. And probably if you're trying to solve this problem, you're just trying out all different factors. So if I try to factor 57, I'm trying out all different numbers and to see whether 57 is divisible by these numbers. And it turns out that we don't really know how to do it much better than that. So the biggest number here, the computer can still solve this problem, but in cryptography we use even much larger numbers, so that even computers will not be able to solve this problem efficiently. So here we have this problem. Multiplication is easy, going from A to B, but factorization going from B to A is very hard. So we have this asymmetry. And it turns out that this specific problem, this asymmetry, we can use to design cryptographic primitives, which was very interesting. And back in 1978, when these three cryptographers found out that they could do this, they designed this RSA encryption scheme. This was really a breakthrough. So hopefully this gives some intuition on how to design public key encryption. We need to have a mathematical problem with this asymmetry, and then sometimes we can design a cryptographic scheme out of it. However, mostly we do not actually know how to prove security. So the asymmetry I showed before, we don't know how to factor integers efficiently, but at the same time we were also unable to prove that it is extremely hard to factor integers. So theoretically, it would be possible that tomorrow a very bright mathematician wakes up and comes up with an algorithm for factoring numbers efficiently. That would be a huge breakthrough, but it's a theoretic possibility. So security is only assumed to hold. Well, for this reason, and also some other reasons, cryptanalysis, so analyzing a cryptographic scheme is actually very crucial, is important. So it allows us to try and break a cryptographic scheme and invalidate the assumptions. So we can throw away the insecure schemes. And we can also quantify the hardness by doing this. So if we want to deploy RSA in practice, we not only need to know that the problem is hard, but we also need to know how hard it is exactly. How big do the numbers need to be before I can safely use this scheme? So that's something that's part of cryptanalysis, which is really crucial. And if you look at history, it takes actually many years of cryptanalysis before we really trust a cryptographic protocol. So also in the 90s, when RSA was deployed more and more to protect the internet, in the first iterations, the keys that were used were either too small or some vulnerabilities were found. So there we really had this back and forward, this arms race between cryptographers and cryptanalysts. Until we sort of converged to a system, the system that we're using nowadays that we assume to be secure. And we have a lot of trust in that system. So let's now move to quantum computing. How does quantum computing play a role in all of this? So I will not spend a lot of time on quantum computers, but for us, what is important is that quantum computers present a fundamentally different way of computing. So classical computers make use of so-called bits, or zeros and ones, but quantum computers make use of qubits. And qubits are basically combinations of a 0 and a 1. In this figure, you see that the 0 and a 1 are basically two different values, and a qubit can be like any combination on this sphere between a 0 and a 1. And the nice thing is that intuitively you get this quantum parallelism, that if you do a computation on a qubit, you're sort of doing a computation both on the 0 and on the 1 simultaneously. There's a lot of nuances there that I'm hiding under the rug, but basically this is some intuition. It's very hard to build these kind of devices that work with qubits. So qubits are typically photons or semiconducting wires, and then you can see an example of a quantum computer in the figure here. So it's very difficult and challenging to build them, but a lot of big tech companies and universities are working on it, and then we'll in a few slides I will show you some of the progress that has been made in the field of quantum computing. But it's really fundamentally different, and it redefines which computational problems are hard. So some of the problems that are very hard for classical computers to solve are very hard or very easy for quantum computers to solve. And one of the examples is this factorization problem, which is easy to solve for a quantum computer by running Shor's algorithm. What is further important to note is that the quantum computer is not a supercomputer. It's not just a very powerful computer. It cannot solve all the problems very efficiently. A quantum computer is really good at solving very specific computational problems. So it will not give you a speed up and improvement for all the computational tasks, but only for a very specific set. So Shor's algorithm was already mentioned, stemming from 1994. And it allows you to solve the factorization and also the discrete logarithm problem. And these are two problems that are used in cryptography. And it can do so very efficiently. So basically, there's an exponential speed up over classical computers. We also have Grover's algorithm, which is a very generic algorithm that allows you to search in a unstructured database. And you can use this algorithm, for instance, to do a key search. So if you want to do a brute force search to a cryptographic key, then you can use Grover's algorithm to do that. And this gives you a quadratic speed up with respect to what we can do classically. So the speed up is not exponential, only quadratic. So the benefit of using Grover's algorithm is a little bit, it's not as big as Shor's algorithm over classical computing. If we translate this to the fields of symmetric and asymmetric cryptography, then we basically see that Symmetric key cryptography is weakened by quantum attacks. It's not completely broken, but weakened a little bit by Grover's algorithm. And this asymmetric cryptography is RSA elliptic curve cryptography. It's completely broken by quantum attacks by using Shor's algorithm. There are some nuances. So if we dive into the symmetric key cryptography, then theoretically it's indeed the case that Grover's algorithm allows you to do a more efficient key search. So at face value, this sort of warrants the use of larger keys. So before we were satisfied with 128-bit keys. Nowadays, taking quantum computer into account, we may want to move to 256-bit cryptographic keys. However, if you look at Grover attacks more detailed, then you will see that it's very hard to actually run them on a quantum computer. So you really require very powerful quantum computer, and also Grover attacks are not parallelizable, whereas classical attacks to symmetric key cryptography are parallelizable. So this basically means that the effect of Grover's algorithm to the security of symmetric key cryptography is maybe not that big. So nowadays the consensus is basically that AES 128-bit with 128-bit keys is going to be secure for in the coming years. So you don't have to prioritize your migration or changing the use of this cryptographic scheme. Okay. So quantum computers. So what are we seeing around us? We basically see that in the news every few months there's a big breakthrough in the field of quantum computers. So here we see Google, IBM, Microsoft. They're all working on their own quantum computers. They're using different techniques to try to establish this, and they're doing really exciting things, breaking boundaries of what is possible with quantum computers, but still many challenges remain. But it's good, or it is important to note that there's like billions of dollars being invested in building quantum computers. So it's a development we can definitely not we should not ignore. At the same time, there's a bit of a nuance. Is also should also be made. Basically, there's still a lot of very big challenges that need to be overcome before quantum computers really reach the level in which they can run Shor's algorithm and break a cryptography. So these are some of these same organizations making claims about the difficulty of building these quantum computers. So a question that we often get is, when will quantum computers be able to break cryptography? That's a very difficult question because it depends on so many different aspects, so many different factors. What we basically see here is we see a lot of different quantum computers and how they have been developing over time. So we only look at the number of qubits here, which is one of the measures of how powerful, how big a quantum computer is. And we do see that there's definitely an increase since 2016, 2017. So quantum computers are becoming more and more powerful. At the same time here, we see this green line which estimates the number of physical qubits that you need to break RSA. 2048, which is about 1 million. And you see that there's still quite a big gap. And looking at all of this, well, you can try to extrapolate. You should be very careful in doing these extrapolations because there's so much uncertainty in what will happen in the next few years. But you can see that there's still a bit of a gap in between what we are able to do right now and what is needed to break cryptography. What is also interesting to note here is that not only are quantum computers becoming more powerful, also the algorithms are becoming more efficient. So a year ago, a little bit over a year ago, this green line was actually at 10 million. So before we thought that we needed 10 million physical qubits, but nowadays we see that the algorithms became more efficient, and we now know how to do it with about 1 million physical qubits. And very recently, so last month, there was actually this paper with a new quantum computing architecture, and they claim to reduce the cost of breaking RSA to even 100,000 physical qubits. So we see two simultaneous developments. On the one hand, we see quantum computers, so the hardware becoming more powerful, and on the other hand, we see the software becoming more efficient, so the hardware requirements going down. So we see these two, this green line and these lines moving towards each other, and if they intersect, then from a cryptographic perspective, we have a problem. Again, there's a lot of nuances I can make to this claim, but let's not dive into that too much. So it will probably take a few more years before quantum computers break cryptography. But at the same time, history has also shown that migrating to new cryptography is very complicated and takes time. So DES and MD5, these are recent cryptographic primitives that turned out to be insecure. So they were deployed, but needed to be changed because they turned out to be less secure than we thought. And this takes many years. So we still encounter MD5, for instance, in some software implementations. Further, encrypted data that is transmitted right now can be eavesdropped by attackers and can be decrypted later. This is referred to, or this is called the store now, decrypt later attack. And it basically means that an attacker can already try to eavesdrop all of the information that we're communicating right now, just store it somewhere and wait until we have this quantum computer available and then try to decrypt your information. So in some settings, this may not be a problem. So some information, it doesn't matter if a year or 2 years from now it can be decrypted. But if you have like really sensitive information, think about your medical records or even state secrets, then and then also many years from now, this information should remain a secret, should remain secure. So this means that in cryptography, we always have to look ahead. So we should not only consider the threats of today, but also the threats of the future. And quantum computers are one of those threats. And Michele Mosca actually came up with this very simple theorem, and it basically states that if the time you need to update your IT infrastructure plus the time you want your information to remain protected exceeds the time it takes to develop a quantum computer, then you have a big problem. And you can imagine that it will take 5 to 10 years to, depending on the complexity of your IT infrastructure, to update it. Some information has to remain secure for several decades. So even if a quantum computer will only be powerful enough in 2050, for instance, or 2040, you will already have to do something about this right now. So there's some urgency. And we also know from the Snowden files, for instance, that at the end, this is one of the things that the NSA does, storing a lot of eavesdropping on a lot of communication channels and storing this information. So this is not a extremely hypothetical, unrealistic scenario. Okay, so what are we doing about this threat? What are we doing against it? So all over the world, governments and organizations are working on mitigating this threat. So in 2022, there was a US White House directive stating that the government agencies, federal government agencies, should start their migration process towards quantum-resistant cryptography. That's the first step. So this is a more recent directive also for the US, basically stating that in 2030, many systems should already have migrated to new forms of cryptography capable of withstanding quantum attacks. So for other applications, we can wait a little bit longer, but for some, this migration already has to be finished in 2030, which is quite soon already. In the EU, Last year, there was a coordinated implementation roadmap for the transition to post-quantum cryptography. They basically have guidelines and recommendations for when and how to start the PQC migration, so migrating to this new cryptography. And very recently, they mentioned that they are going to change regulations, so to make this migration actually mandatory for organizations in the EU. So I already mentioned post-quantum cryptography, so cryptography capable of withstanding cryptographic or quantum attacks. So what is this kind of cryptography? So basically, the idea is the same. We still need this asymmetry, so these mathematical problems that in one direction are easy to evaluate, but in the other direction are very hard to solve. We just need other problems that are also hard to solve for quantum computers. But the principle is still the same. Unfortunately, we have various mathematical platforms in which these problems exist. So lattices is an important example. So in this figure, you see a two-dimensional lattice. So all these dots together, they form this grid, which is also referred to as a lattice. And you can define various problems that involve lattices. One of the problems is, for instance, given a random point in this two-dimensional space, so this T star, what is the closest lattice point? So this seems to be a very easy problem, finding the closest lattice point. Well, you can already see the solution in this figure, of course. But if we increase the dimension, so this is a two-dimensional example, if we increase the dimension to say 1000, then all of a sudden this problem becomes extremely difficult, even for powerful computers to solve. And that's exactly the hardness that we need and that we can use to build cryptographic systems. And people have done that, have designed cryptographic primitives that use this mathematical problem. And there's also several other mathematical platforms which we can use to build cryptography. So this is no longer just an academic endeavor. So in 2016, the US National Institute for Standards and Technology, NIST, they started this competition for designing post-quantum cryptography, so a standardization competition. The idea is basically that cryptographers from all over the world could submit proposals for post-quantum cryptography. And during the competition, they would evaluate all the proposals, and you would be able to evaluate other proposals. If a proposal turned out to be vulnerable, it would be dropped. And then the most efficient ones that are still secure were basically selected. So this was a very elaborate, transparent project or competition. And in 2024, so 8 years after the start of the competition, 3 out of 4 standards were published. So these are these 3 FIPS standards. And in March 2025, last year, an additional standard was published. And there's still standardization initiatives going on, but the main message here is that now we actually have these standards in which we trust a lot. So we do believe that they are secure. They have been very well studied, and they can be deployed in practice, and organizations are already deploying these standards in practice. It's also important to note that standardization is not straightforward. It's a very, that's also why it took so many years. For instance, one of the things that happened was that there was this one promising proposal, Psych, who made it all the way to the 4th round of the competition, was completely broken in 2022. So, which is of course very surprising after 6 years of researching this scheme. Only then the vulnerability was found, and it was completely broken. So it also shows how important it is to take your time in analyzing these schemes. So this was really a fundamental vulnerability that could not be fixed. Other things also happened. So for instance, in December 2023, Kyber Slash was a side channel attack that was found in many of the implementations. So for Kyber, the actual protocol was secure, but many implementations of that protocol actually contained a vulnerability. So this was also important. So if your standard is done, then also implementation should be done very carefully. And you can imagine that if you deploy a vulnerable scheme, you can have a very big problem. Okay. So we now know a little bit about what post-quantum cryptography is, how you design it, why we need it. So let's just start using post-quantum cryptography. That's true. That's what we want to do. But a full migration is actually quite a difficult problem. So we started the presentation already with cryptography being omnipresent. So all around us we are using cryptography in all different kinds and forms and ways, which makes it very difficult to replace all of that by post-quantum cryptography. It can also be risky. So if you introduce or if you migrate to a scheme that actually turns out to have a vulnerability, yeah, then you have a very big problem. So you have to be very careful in this migration. And also the field is still developing quite rapidly. So we're gaining these new insights, new protocols. So you can also imagine that new protocols will be available soon and more migrations will follow. So several documents have appeared already. So for instance, this is something that we wrote together with IFD, CWI, and TNO, the PQC Migration Handbook, and it tries to provide guidelines for migrating towards post-quantum cryptography. And the main message is actually very simple, but still it's important to convey it, that you have this three-step approach where you first diagnose the problem, make an inventory of where you're using which cryptography, then you plan how to change this cryptography, what's the effect of changing your cryptography, because keys will be bigger, you may need more powerful hardware. So what's the effect and how much will it cost, for instance? And then you can actually execute the migration. And of course, in the handbook, all of these steps are elaborated on. It's further important to note that quite a few organizations have already migrated. So we see here these messaging apps. So Apple iMessage, but also the Signal app, they're already using post-quantum cryptography. So you are probably also using it in practice already. Also, Google and Cloudflare, they have migrated to post-quantum cryptography. So if you are using a up-to-date browser, Chrome or also Firefox, many others, then you can probably see that you're using post-quantum cryptography. So you can look up in your browser. You can also take a look at this. If you see this TLS 1.3 with the Kyber support, and Kyber refers to this post-quantum cryptography. So you're already using it, probably without noticing actually the difference. So this is an overview by Cloudflare. They try to monitor the deployment of post-quantum cryptography, and they're seeing that we're close to 60% or between 50 and 60% of the traffic being protected against this quantum computers already. So it's all going in a good direction. At the same time, there's still quite a lot to be done. So there's still quite a gap before we reach the 100%. And also, this is only a very specific application protecting the internet. Still have a few more minutes before we move to the questions. So I have some bonus slides on digital signatures. So let's just continue with that. What I've been focused on mainly is this confidentiality of the functionality that's one of the functionalities that cryptography provides. And confidentiality is really susceptible to the store now, decrypt later attack. So that's also why it's very important to protect against the quantum computers of the future now already, because otherwise this confidentiality will be broken. At the beginning, I mentioned that cryptography also deals with integrity, authenticity, for instance, and it does so by using digital signatures. So digital signatures are, well, just as important as encryption schemes, for instance. and they are also vulnerable to quantum attacks. So we also need to migrate those. However, for key exchange or encryption, we see that the PQC migration introduces roughly a 4% slowdown for clients on the internet. So if you're browsing the internet, which is very acceptable. So people probably don't even notice this slowdown. For digital signatures, the problem is much more severe, this is much more problematic. So post-quantum signatures are roughly 20 times bigger than like the classical conventional signatures that we have. And also if you, every TLS handshake, so if you set up a connection to a new website, contains about 5 signatures. So there's a lot of signatures going around the internet being sent over these communication channels. So if you increase the size of your signatures by a factor 20, this will have a very big impact. And at the same time, digital signatures or integrity, they don't suffer from this harvest now, store now, decrypt later vulnerability. So the effect is basically that the deployment of PQ signatures lags behind. So we focused for now mostly on a key exchange encryption, but also for digital signatures, the development and the migration lags behind. But because the migration is always so difficult and the impact is so big for PQ signatures, we should also not wait too long, because then we risk a very big problem, namely that we're too late in this migration. So I just wanted to mention this slides that basically what you can do is you can just change your cryptography from classical to post-quantum, but in some cases you can do more clever things. And this is something that's going on in the case of public key infrastructures, digital certificates, or digital signatures. And basically we're seeing now this development of basically sort of redesigning the way we use these X509 certificates. Namely, with the new approach is called Merkle tree certificates. And basically you get this 12 times or even 97 times improvement over the conventional approach when you use this approach now. So basically there's some exciting developments going on where we're not just migrating to post-quantum cryptography, but we're, well, redesigning how this cryptography is being used on the internet. Very recently, so yeah, this IETF draft is from February, so last month. This draft got adopted by the IETF, so they will be working on standardizing this new approach. And Google and Cloudflare again are running experiments with Merkle tree certificates as we speak. So you can also look up your flags in your Chrome browser, and you can enable this option, verify Merkle tree certificates, and you will actually be participating in this experiment. So I'll leave it at that, and then there's some time for questions.
Hi, thank you so much for this very interesting class. I think I learned a lot. I'll be honest, it was not my field of knowledge before, but it was very explainable, very understandable. I'm happy to see that we have a lot of questions for students in the chat. So I'll start with some of them. I apologize in advance for the students who I won't be able to ask the questions for. But let's start with some 2 AI-related questions I found quite interesting. Is it possible that in the future, that AI might be responsible to code and develop cryptography for businesses in banks, the internet, or any other businesses?
Yes, I guess that's possible. It's also it makes sense to make use of AI for the development of cryptography. At the same time, it's very important to understand all the nitty-gritty details of your cryptographic primitive, and to understand all the design choices so that we can also analyze the vulnerabilities. So another approach that you sometimes hear about is security by obscurity. So a scheme is secure just because we don't fully know how it works, so we also don't know how to break it. And that's, of course, not what we want. We do not want to do this. So I do see use cases for AI, but especially in cryptography, it's essential that we really understand the primitives that we're proposing and that we're using in practice.
Thank you. And another question, for industrial OT with legacy systems that cannot be easily be updated, what is the practical approach to quantum safe cryptography, given that these devices often cannot be patched or replaced quickly?
Yeah, so that's okay. So indeed, I showed some very optimistic graphs and figures that the PQC migration is well on its way. For instance, in WhatsApp, Signal, or also on the internet. But indeed, there are many other systems in which this migration is much harder, and OT is one of them. So in operational technology environments. So I guess in some of these OT environments, we're still using. We're sometimes not even using cryptography nowadays. So the first step is to actually start deploying cryptography. One of the ways to deal with the problem that post-quantum cryptography is less efficient is to look for other architectures as well. So you could, for instance, also design a system that only uses symmetric key cryptography, for which we also have lightweight variants. Then key management becomes a bit more difficult, but that's the way to go about it. Yeah, the short answer is that there's quite a few challenges to be resolved. So OT is one of them. Automotive, we face the same kind of problems, efficiency. So hopefully that gives a little bit of an idea of the directions that we're moving towards.
Thank you. And another question, it sounds like post-quantum cryptography algorithms would require larger keys and signatures. Do we know how this increased overheat will impact constraints environments like IoT devices, smart cards, or high-frequency trading platforms? Will there be an impact even?
Yeah, so I guess the answer to that question is basically the same. So the main problem is for digital signature schemes. So for digital signature schemes, the impact is most severe. For encryption and key exchange, the keys become a bit bigger, but the protocols sometimes even become more efficient. So there we see an efficiency improvement if you move to lattice-based cryptography, which is interesting. Still in IoT devices or OT devices, it may sometimes happen that keys don't fit. So there's just not enough memory or storage to store or to work with these devices. So then not only software updates are required, but also hardware upgrades. And there's also cryptography being developed specifically for these kind of applications. So highly optimized cryptography. But it's a field that is still under development.
Yeah, thank you. I have also a more job market related question here that I found interesting. With quantum computers in production, when completed, how will they change or affect the cybersecurity market and also the job market for cryptography?
Well, of course, nowadays it's in some sense it's just the next chapter, right? So in cryptography, we've always had these developments that attacks are becoming stronger and stronger, and we need to design and analyze new schemes to withstand the new attacks. And quantum computers are one. Well, it's a very big development, of course, but it's just the next development and the next type or the next category of schemes that we are building. So in cryptography, in some sense, not much changes. The thing is that in the coming 10 years, the coming decade, I think we will be very busy with this migration. So we need a lot of people to have sufficient knowledge about cryptography to actually contribute to this migration. So I would expect there to be quite a lot of work in this field for the coming decade.
So I understand it's a good field to enter a little bit now and be sure that you have a job in the future.
Exactly.
Yeah. Also, I'm from the field of international relations, particularly, and I found a question that was quite related to that. Do you see a role for international treaties and accords similar to the nuclear non-proliferation to manage quantum cryptography risks, especially given the asymmetric capabilities among nations and private actors? So do you think that the international treaties can handle that, can benefit that, or is that a dreamlike situation?
It's a very relevant question, and there are there is some overlap between other treaties. But the thing with cryptography and cybersecurity is, of course, that you can use a quantum computer to attack cryptography without people noticing this. So we don't really know what the NSA is doing, of course. So they can sort of hide the fact that they already have a quantum computer, and also that they are using it. So there are some serious geopolitical scenarios that you need to consider, but it's also a bit hard to speculate there. So for now, I would basically advise to start deploying the techniques, the cryptography that we have to protect ourselves against quantum computers, because these techniques are available. They are publicly available. So all the standards that I've mentioned, the NIST standards, for instance, they are publicly available. So anyone in the world can start deploying them. So I think that would be a better strategy, to just make sure that you are well prepared for this future threat, and so that we don't, they don't have this problem of an asymmetric power balance in the future.
Great, and that's an outlook on the situation. I have one more question, and then we're going to go for closing remarks, given that we're close to our ending of the class. Given the NIST's standardization of post-quantum algorithms, what do you see as the biggest challenge in real world? And the user gives some options: adoption, performance, interoperability, or trust in the new mathematical assumptions.
Some big challenges have already been mentioned. So I think there's a lot of environments in which the deployment of these new schemes is going to be very difficult. So IoT, OT is an example. There's still new standards being developed as well to deal with those scenarios. So for instance, we have these NIST standards, but there's still a parallel competition going on for new signature schemes that are more efficient, so more tailored towards these lightweight or towards these resource constrained environments. Further, we've been mainly talking about digital signatures and key exchange or encryption. These are the two most important or biggest applications of cryptography, but there's many more. So there's also a lot of so-called fancy or more advanced cryptography out there. Think about group signatures or zero-knowledge proof systems. And for some of these cryptographic functionalities, we actually don't know yet how to do that, how to make them secure against quantum computers. So there's a lot of developments going on, mainly academically in that field, to try to design new schemes. And further, it's also about making sure organizations and governments actually start with the migration. So that's going to be a big challenge as well. So creating awareness and also regulation that forces organizations to start with the migration. We see a lot of procrastination in that respect as well.
Unfortunately. Well, thank you so much then for your lecture. I'll give it to you a few last words if you want to make a closing statement.
Well, I think I've said it all, so thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, so we're having a lot of thank yous in the chat of the conversation, the Q&A, very informative lecture. Thank you. And I can only share the sentiments of our students. So thank you once more for the lecture. And for our students, see you in half an hour for our second lecture of the day with the cyber resilience game. So bye-bye to Thomas, and see your students later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.